has 2 thumbs, just completed installing AKS on HCI, and is ready to take the next step. This guy. That's awesome! Are you ready for this? Let's do it! So, you can do this 2 ways. You can do this with Windows Admin Center. Great. GUI. Cool. Or you can do it with PowerShell. You can use Bash or CLI, right? Whatever you want. I'm going to use PowerShell. Why? Love the keyboard. First thing we got to do is we got to start creating the cluster. We're going to do that with PowerShell. We're going to use new AKS HCI cluster. It's going to ask us some things, right? The name of the AKS cluster, the node pool name. This is the name of the worker cluster itself in AKS, right? We're going to need to know what OS we're going to use. You could use Windows. You could use Linux. Doesn't matter, right? That's up to you. You can use both. Interesting. Linux on Microsoft. We are going to have to define the control plane count and the node pool count. So the control plane is what's doing all the API work for AKS. I know it's kind of scary, but this is like the infrastructure of AKS. By default, it's 1, but that's not really highly available, right? And so if you're doing this in production or you want to really scale the thing out, you want to do this in a matter of 3, right? For that failover, right? So the node pool is where the apps are going to actually go to. You're going to have to give the node pool a name, and then you're going to have to define the node pool count. And the node pool is the actual AKS cluster nodes, right? This is the workers that are doing all the work, right? So we got to tell it what the name of that's going to be, how many we want. We want 1, 3, 10, right? Whatever you want. Just keep in mind, 1 is great for like dev lab scenario. 3 is great for HA, right? So if you're going to do this in production, you're going to start at least with 3, work your way up. Now don't worry, all this can be changed after the fact. So you don't have to redeploy, though it's very easy to redeploy AKS, but you don't have to redeploy AKS, right? You could just modify and do scale out, and not a big deal. That's awesome! IT pros, we have our vocabulary terms, right? Problem is, a lot of those terms, when we're talking about Kubernetes, overlap with each other. When I say a Kubernetes cluster, I'm not talking about the same cluster that you just got done deploying with Azure Stack HCI. So an Azure Stack HCI is a physical cluster, right? You have your nodes, and those infrastructure nodes can host different clusters. And these would be more akin to guest clustering that you may be used to if you've ever created a SQL guest cluster. In the AKS world, when I say a cluster, I'm talking about AKS nodes that are now as a cluster. The pods, the nodes, and the clusters, same vocabulary, but now we're talking about AKS. After we've deployed our AKS cluster, we've answered all those questions and it's deployed successfully. We're almost done. All we have to do is now enable ARC connection for HCI. And dude, this is even simpler, right? So we're going to use the command enable AKS HCI ARC connection. And we're just going to give it the name of that cluster that we created. You can even pipe this if you stored it as a variable. Now this one's going to take a little bit of time. So the reason is because it's installing the ARC agent and all the communication channels that it needs to talk to that AKS cluster that's now living on your HCI cluster in your data center or your edge location, whatever it may be. So that's going to establish communication so that your devs never ever have to log on to this box ever, or to your HCI nodes altogether. And that's really where we start to draw the line. This is where we're starting to see some DevOps, right? So devs or developers will go and create the connection to this AKS cluster from their repo or Helm or Flux or whatever it may be, whatever tool they decide to use to put their code, their application into this AKS cluster you've deployed. But as an IT infrastructure engineer, we have to create it, connect it to ARC. Now, one thing I didn't say though is there are some providers that have to be registered. And so these providers, very clear, but they have to be installed and allowed so that our Azure subscription can allow this communication. While we wait for this ARC connection to happen, this is probably a good time to tell you that if you like this video, and I know I'm funny, you should sign up, like, subscribe, do all, you know, that YouTube-y stuff so that you can get more of these videos whenever I have the chance to make them. Sound good? So now that ARC is enabled, really all we're going to do is go to the Azure portal. And we're going to go to Azure Arc and go to Kubernetes. You should see that Kubernetes cluster that you just created with that name. Here we go. Right? And we can dive into it. The last step, though, is to give your developers the name of the cluster, and then you want to give them a token, right? And so this is a bearer token, right? And you can see here, it's not automatically generated for me. So we do have to go run a few more lines of code. I'll put a link in the show notes to show you how to do this, right? But if we follow these steps, we're going to go create a role. We're going to create a token, and then we're going to output that token, and that's going to be something that our developers can utilize to now see the namespaces and the connections that AKS cluster has. That's it. 3 steps. Got AKS up and running. Now your developers can connect this to Helm, to Flux, to GitOps, right? And they can start developer voodoo magic, right? Whatever it may be. And then you, as an infrastructure engineer, can take the next steps. So, next steps I would suggest you do is do things like enable insights, start learning how that GitOps connection is made, and maybe even look into integrating Azure Active Directory role-based access on this Kubernetes cluster. If you like this video, make sure you share it, subscribe, like, leave a comment, right? And look out for more. I'll be making more of these videos. I'm Michael Godfrey, and can't wait to see you in the next video. Thanks.